Welcome back to the Invest in Yourself podcast. Today I'm joined by ex-Gambino crime family mobster Robert Borelli, also known as Robert Engels. Robert was involved with the Mafia life for a number of years, and he committed a lot of crimes during his time as a mobster. Robert would eventually get involved with selling drugs and also doing them as well. He did end up landing himself in prison though. While in prison, Robert had an awakening and gave his life to God. Robert wrote a book based on his life experience called The Witness. I highly recommend it. It was a great book. He was so deeply involved with the Mafia and he was able to turn his life around. Please subscribe to my channel for more interviews like this, and without further ado, let's get into Robert's story. Good morning, Robert. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. And how you doing?
Oh, I'm really good, man. I appreciate you taking out some time and out of your busy schedule to make time to come on my show, man. I appreciate it.
Well, I want to say thank you for allowing me to share God's redemption story of my life on your show. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've had you on in the past. If people haven't seen it, maybe less than a year ago, and we talked about your story. But that was before I'd read the book, and I was like, well, there's some other stuff we can cover, and I can have you on again. And I mean, you have a really good redemption story. So I mean, for anybody that loves it, good redemption stories, I mean, Robert is the definition of that. I mean, you've really changed your life around for the better, and it just gives people hope, man, because to see the stuff that you were involved with and stuff that went on in your early life. I mean, it would give a normal person to think, wow, there's no hope for this guy. But that's not true. That's not true at all, man.
Exactly. It's never too late for a new beginning.
That's true. Well, I think the way we could start the show today is we can go into your early life and work our way up to where you're at now. Where did you grow up at?
Brooklyn, New York. I thought it was East New York, but now I'm finding out it was Ocean Hill, Brownsville. So anyway, very close to each other. So
Yeah. Yeah, well, and as well, if people haven't seen your documentary, I mean, it's another phenomenal piece of work you just put out there as well, and it goes into your whole life. But I got chills watching it, man, because it's very powerful. So, another way that we can go about this is, I mean, what was your early life like? I mean, your family, your friends. I mean, who were the people you were associating around back then?
well, how I try to paint the picture of it is let people know there's like three types of people in my life: of my family, my mom, my dad, my sisters, my brothers. It's a low income family we had. Most of the arguments, if they, the few arguments that were usually over finances. We don't have, you know, money to pay for the kids for school or clothes or stuff like that there. And so at an early age, I didn't want to be like my dad because I didn't want to have struggles like that my family was having. I didn't want to have that kind of life to look forward to. And then we had guys that were a little bit older than me, just coming back from the Vietnam War when I was growing up. And some of them were all messed up with either alcohol or drugs from coming back from the war. And I didn't want to be like them. And then you had the guys down the block that had the social clubs. And if you've seen Bronx Tale or if you've seen Goodfellas, you get a kind of an idea how they hung out outside. And I gravitated towards that life because it looked like they had it all together.
Yeah.
So, the glamour of it, the nice clothes, cars, stuff like that my family didn't have, they had. And I gravitated to that lifestyle and started hanging out there like, you seen in some of those movies.
Well, yeah, and you bring up a good point. Is like you see all this bad stuff struggling with your family, and then these guys coming back from war, and then you see these guys on the corner with suits, having fun, laughing, no arguing, and I mean, it looks glamorous, right? I mean, to a young kid that really sees it like that, and then to really understand that life is a whole different thing. And I think for you, when you got into being around these guys, how did the first encounter go down, or how did you get involved with them?
Well, I was back in that neighborhood, fighting was a big thing. It was very. We didn't use the word racial. We used the terms that my family would say. You stood with your own kind. You hung out with your own kind. You married your own kind. kind of like that. So I didn't really understand until later on about the racial barriers that were there, but they were there in my neighborhood. So there's a lot of fights. If you went outside the little neighborhood that you were involved with, and you went into somebody else's neighborhood, chances were that you're going to have a little bit of a fight. So you had to learn two things real quick: run quick and fight good. And sometimes you had to do both.
Yeah. And so when you were young, I mean, you were really young that this all went down. I mean, what age would you say you're around at this point?
Well, I'm going to go from the ages probably like 10 to about 14 years old. And I was a pretty tough kid. I didn't take anything from anybody. Um, and I think the guys from the social club seen some of that there and they kind of liked me. So when I started going by them a little bit, they would give me little chores to do, run to the store, stuff like that. Go inside and they had a pool table and play pool with them. And then as I started getting a little bit older, they would let me work some of the card games. They would have a card game in the back, and I would serve the sandwiches and drinks and stuff like that, make tips and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that's how it really all started beginning. And then I started getting involved with fireworks. And, the more that they can trust you and the more that you, I guess, will be, I wouldn't say obedient, but, that you're embracing that lifestyle, the more things that they give you to do. So,
Yeah. And I mean, for you too, while you were slowly working your way with them, I mean, you even had joined a little neighborhood gang as well, the Fulton Rockaway Boys as well, right? Would that be
yeah,
around the same time?
yeah, F&R boys. That's kind of like when we were younger, and then that dissipated, and then like I said, I started hanging out with the older guys and getting
And
church to do, and I just really grabbed it. I mean, at the age of 15 years old, I mean, it sounds so stupid today when I look at it, but I was already having shark skin pants and smoking a cigar.
as
I
a
mean, I
young kid,
really,
yeah.
I really played the role, and I really, I don't know. But I
Well,
look at it now and say, man, people had to think I was a really whack job or something like 15 years old.
15-year-old kid standing on the corner with a cigar.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, you think about that today, that'd be a really big deal, and cops see that, they freak out. But back then, I mean, it's a different time, a whole different, era, a whole different, environment back then. That's for sure. And I mean, with this, so I was around your 15. I mean, what years were you with that the Rockaway gang? Was that just like a couple years kind of thing, or?
well, yeah, I think every gangs were pretty big back in them days, and you go into the '60s, the gangs were pretty big, and I think every little neighborhood had their own little gang. You know what I mean? So that's why I say when you left your neighborhood, walked into somebody else's neighborhood, you're probably going to get into a beef because you were on somebody else's turf. That's what we used to call it. So, but it was probably made you from the age of maybe I'd say 8 or 9 years old until about maybe 13 years old.
Yeah, and I remember, I believe in the book too. Like you would walk to school, and then you would be there with your, I believe, your younger brother, and you'd kind of have to watch out for him because from the other gangs they would try to mess with you and get into fights. I mean, is that something that would happen around that age as well?
Yeah, but basically, I probably 5 days a week that I went to school. Probably three, maybe four of those days was kind of an altercation with the guys that are coming. That we crossed paths. Public school was in right behind my where I lived, and my Catholic school was into their neighborhood, and that's I used to have to pass them, and they used to have to pass me to go to school. And a lot of times it was altercations, sometimes fights, and then sometimes just words. And we used to have this thing we used to call it kind of like the punk test. And whoever moved out of whoever's way was the punk. So you don't want to be the punk. So if you were walking the same path, they're coming this way, you're going that way, whoever moved would have been the punk. So that's how most of the fights used to start because you bump into each other. I mean, it was just really stupid, but in them days, that's what we thought. I mean, that's how I lived.
Yeah, kind of like a game of chicken.
Exactly right, right.
Okay, well, when let's see, so when you were, I suppose, out of the gang stage and becoming working your way up to being some kind of an associate in the mob, you was around, you'd say around 15 years old is when you really started to work your way up.
Yeah.
And who was like the guys that you were around? I mean, do you recall, or was there a particular guy that you were really reporting to, or anything like that?
Well,
at
no,
that
no,
point?
what I was just like a kid, so I would come and go. It's not like I was given chores to do or jobs to do or anything like that. But I would come. But Gene Gotti was one of my idols when I was growing up. He was friends with my sister Betty, who was a couple of years older than me, and Jeannie, I think, had me by like 6 years, 6 or 7 years. And he was coming around to the club that we had on Fulton Street. And then that club moved, and I started going on to Eastern Parkway and hanging out with same family, Gambino family, but different crew.
Yeah, and I mean with Gene, I think he ended up. What happened with him? He's just doing life in prison. Is he still alive?
Jeannie's still alive, and from my
Yeah.
understanding, he came home about 2 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean that's a long time to go into that, and yeah, no, I know, man. It's definitely got to be rough to have growing up and having a mentor, like, being involved with crime, because then, I mean, that's what you idolize, you look into, and that's what you want to strive to be, or even, more better. And at that point in his life, I mean, he was just maybe a associate or made made dude back in the family at that point. You think?
Yeah. But,
Yeah.
I want to just say this. I think a lot of what was on TV also, I don't know the right word to say, but I looked into. Like when I was a kid, you had the Little Rascals, you had the Bowery Boys, and gangster movies was pretty big in them days. So you had Edward G. Robinson, James Cagney, and I always rooted for the bad guys. And a
Yeah.
lot of those movies, some of them were made from my neighborhood. So even some of the relatives of those guys were in my neighborhood, and I would know them. So, I mean, I guess at an early age, I really just wanted to be a gangster.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was just all around you, and that's what you saw was like the cool thing. I mean, because it was like on movies and stuff, and really glamorized. And I mean, you see these guys having a fun time. But I think an event that we could probably talk about that you were involved with as a young kid was I believe, the local store owner that you guys were gonna go, you and your crew were gonna go and bomb the store, and the cops got involved, right? And then you had a mob guy that he had gotten you off. He had helped paid off the judge or something, wasn't it?
Well, that might have been a little fabricated in the book because I wasn't sure that that's exactly what happened. You know,
Oh, what? How would you say things happen then?
because they wouldn't let me know that they were did something like that, got involved with something like that, my court case and paid off
Oh,
somebody, something like that. They won't let me know. We assume that might have happened, but we really don't know. So the book is based on a true story. It's not all true because there's certain parts that we had to slide in there just to make because we wouldn't know. We had to fill in the void there in a sense. So we kind of put it that in that term. But yeah, there was a place that I didn't firebomb it. It was a regular grocery store, and we ended up breaking into it to the back and taking sodas and beers and stuff like that. And the guy pointed me out as the one that did it, and I told him, well, I don't know. I said something stupid like "I'll burn your store down," but at that time we were having a gang fight, and we got Molotov cocktail bombs for the gang fight, not for the store. But when the guy see me carrying a gas can, he thought it was for his store, so he called the cops on me, and that's how
yes.
I got arrested.
So I mean, being involved with all that just made you even look even worse, and go into his story with what he had told the cops, and then the cops did come up to you guys, right? They found you, and how did that
Well, they
go?
got locked me up for that. But in them days, when you were a juvenile, you went to the precinct, your family came, got you out, and you got a desk appearance, a court appearance where you had to go to a family court. So that's where we went. And then after going to court a couple of times, the case got dismissed. Fire marshal said it's impossible for this young kid to make that type of a cocktail bomb. And we just added in that was probably one of the wise guys that paid one of those guys to come and say that in court. So that's why I didn't get in trouble.
So that's could have been a thing for sure. Because I mean,
It could have been, but we're not positive. I'm not positive of that.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you think you get away with making cocktails like that? I mean, there's got to be some kind of outside, figure helping or doing something. You know what I mean? Whatever it may have been, but yeah, who knows, man? But you got away with that. That's what I was getting at, just because it made you feel like you were invincible, right? Because you knew that if you did certain things, you wouldn't have consequences because you beat that case. I mean, would you say that?
Well, again, you can see that's kind of like what we see living out today. That there's no consequences to a lot of crimes that are being committed. So therefore, you open up the door for people to commit more crimes. Wasn't like that back then, but you can see that's today. Even by the law, they're just not prosecuting people that. But even back then, because we thought somebody was involved, we thought we could get away with a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, I suppose you grew up a little bit more. You became a teenager, late teenager, and you ran into meeting Anthony Ruggiano Jr., right, and his father.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I mean, you guys were around the same age then.
Anthony, I think, is a year and a couple of months older than me. Yeah.
So, what was your guys' relationship like?
Well, I started hanging out in Queens. Now this is in Ozone Park, and then Anthony had a couple of guys that hung around with him, and they hung out in the pizza store. And I met one of his friends, which happened to be a close friend of mine, became a close friend of mine, Joey Dodona, who has passed away since. But he would bring me around. I met him on a bus. He said, "Come hang out with us," and that's when I started hanging out with Anthony. And then through that day, because of who his father was, he would go meet see his dad, and he would bring me and a couple of guys with him, and we would be known as he would be known as Fat Andy's son, and we'd be known as Fat Andy's son's friends. So that's just how it started. So
You got some perks from being his
eh,
friend. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, after that, I mean, eventually, I mean, there was a whole thing that you had to do. You had to go into hiding and all that with after some things that happened, and Fat Andy had hid you out. And I mean, how long were you in hiding? And I mean, do you want to go into that?
For about a year and a half, I was in hiding. Then I started coming around a little bit, but still in hiding. But I was in the neighborhood a little bit, and uh, and then we started hanging out in a bar, and then somebody got in a disco, and somebody got killed in the disco, and that just brought a lot of stuff on me. So when I got arrested in February of 1975, was for two murders and possession of a weapon.
Yeah, and at that time, when the cops eventually got you. Where was that? I mean, did they find where you're at, or how they come down
Well,
on you?
I had a gun case, and it was under a phony name, John Rosada. I had identification under John Rosada, and I was going back to court for that case. And when I went back to court for that case under John Rosada, they put two and two together. And before you know it, when I went into the courthouse, everybody swarmed me, detectives and all that. And I got arrested for a killing and a broadcasters. And then while I was waiting to go in front of the judge for that, other detectives came in and found out that I was really Robert Engel, and they locked me up for the old case that I had run away from. So it's kind of a little complicated, but that's the way it went down.
And I mean, at that point, did they just trial you in court for all these things that had happened?
Well,
And
I
then
had to lay up for bail, and then I laid up for a couple of months. I think more or less that was kind of, I don't like to say claim for fame. I don't know the right terminology to use, but the way I was being more recognized in that lifestyle is because I end up getting locked up, waiting in jail for bail, keeping my mouth shut, doing the right thing, according to the street laws. And when they finally bailed me out and I came out, and as a young kid, I was only 20 years old, to face two murder cases and a possession of a weapon and just keep his mouth shut and just do his time. I think that got me more recognition of that kind of a lifestyle with those guys. And then I went on trial for one of those cases, one of the murder cases, and I got acquitted of it. And then after that, I was just paraded around like up and coming star in the Gambino crime family, so to speak. And then I would meet a lot of other big big guys down on Mulberry Street and other bosses of other families. And I mean, I was a likable kid. You know, people took a liking to me, and that's kind of like how I really got started to get my reputation in that lifestyle.
Did you end? So I mean, you ended up beating both of them then, both of the cases, the two murders.
I beat one murder case on trial. The other murder case got dismissed. And then the gun case, I took a plea, and then we appealed one of the motions that we put in, and I laid up for a little bit for a 1 to 3 sentence, and then beat it on in the appeal.
Yeah, so I'm sure when you came out, they're like, "Wow, this guy's beating all these cases." Like you said, and it boosted the whole ego and the mafia because I mean, you came out and you said you met all these different guys. I believe in your book for sure, and I remember you telling me that you met Neil Delacroix as well, and they had introduced you to him as like the up and coming, what would you say, the up and coming star?
Becoming star, yeah, that's how they would introduce me.
Yeah, and I mean, what was that like when you met him? Was that pretty much it? You just said hello, kind of thing?
Well, you kept your mouth shut. I was taught just to, shake hands, and if they ask you questions, you answer. But you don't ask them questions. That's for sure. Just keep your mouth shut and listen. That's one of the things that my friend, my mentor Nicky, taught me along when I first started coming around. Is you just keep your ears open and your mouth shut.
Yeah. Well, at that point, after those cases, who became like your guy, the maid guy that you would report to? Like, I mean, because did they appoint you someone, or how did that even happen?
No, they didn't appoint me, but because I was hanging around on Eastern Parkway and Atlantic Avenue, the guy that ran that little neighborhood was Nicky Corozzo, and he was looking out for me even when I was on the lam because I was staying in that area in Brooklyn instead of going out in Queens where the cases were pending, and me and him just hooked up, and he took a great liking to me, and he became my mentor. I started doing it. He became more than a man. He became my dad in that lifestyle. So yeah.
Damn. So I mean, he was the guy all throughout the whole years. He was your guy that you would report to. I mean, you were essentially in his crew. I mean, he was he a capo or anything at the time?
Not at that time. He wasn't even straightened out. He was an associate with under Fat Andy and Andy Ruggiano. And then a couple of years later, he did get straightened out, and that made a big difference too. Of course, his association and my association with him. So I was considered Nicky's right hand man back in them days because I would drive him around. He just took a real love to me, and of course I loved him. And yeah, that's one guy that I tell you that if I had to take a bullet for, it would have been him.
Damn. Yeah. So I mean, you guys really got close, and it was a real brotherhood relationship, is what it sounds like. And so, were you with him when he was elevated to becoming a capo? I mean, what were you around that whole
I was
time?
still around at that time, not as close as we used to be. I got involved with the drug business and kind of shied away from him a little bit because I
Yeah.
didn't want it to be me associated with him while I was messing with the drug business, and then the drug business messed with my business. And then after a point in time, I became very addicted to cocaine, and then eventually crack cocaine.
Yeah, and that's another thing that we'll continue to get into as we go. And I wanted to see if there's because I mean that is a big part of it on how it played in throughout your life in the mob and with the drugs. I mean, they were a very prominent thing. Is there was an issue as well that I read from the book that you had with I believe Charles Carniglia. Do you want to speak on that?
Oh yeah, Charles. Well, what happened was even when I was around Nicky and them, we would go out to a lot of discos and stuff like that. I like the flashy lifestyle, and I had a friend of mine with me, and we went after the night out. We went to a diner to eat. To eat, that's what we did. We couldn't say it was breakfast, even though it was about 5 in the morning. But we'd have a hamburger, something like that, from drinking all night. And a fight broke out, and my friend Michael was killed. And we found out it was Charlie Carnglia who did it, and then because of his association with Neil Delagrosse and John Gotti and all of them, nothing could be done to Charlie Carnglia. So that thing got squashed, but that affected my life. I think a lot because I wanted revenge and I wasn't able to get it.
Yeah, and I mean, so I mean, for you, you just couldn't at all because I mean, he was such higher rank and had good connections with them, and you were just, on the complete opposite, I suppose you could say, because you weren't as prominent as him at that time. I mean, yeah, was he a lot older than you guys?
Charlie, I believe, was a few years. Quite, I think Charlie was probably about 7, 8 years older than me at that point in time. So, and
Yeah.
I was probably about 28, so he was in his 30s, I guess. But I was still the up and coming guy, and Charlie was already established.
hmm So, how did that make you feel? I mean, what did this do to you? I mean, as a person, as a mob, associate. I mean, how did it make you feel at that point? Not, it didn't make you think, oh, I need to get out of this life.
Not so much, but it made me think different of it. It made me think different of it. And I guess my ego was hurt too, and my reputation. Maybe somebody that's around me, I allowed to get killed and didn't do anything about it. So it had a big effect on my way of looking at that lifestyle. And maybe from then on, I can't tell you for sure that maybe I started looking at that lifestyle a little bit differently.
Yeah, that's when you started to see the I suppose the light or some kind of like this isn't right. I mean, because I mean you grew up into it, but now you were starting to see like it wasn't a fair life. You would you say that the rules are not in
Yeah,
anyone's favor really?
well,
The
yeah,
higher up.
you would just, I don't know how to even talk about it that much as far as to try to establish what was going on in my mind. But I just seen it a little bit different that people could do things and because of who they are, but also made me think because I wasn't established that if somebody got killed or if I did something, then I could easily be killed because I wasn't established.
Yeah,
So maybe just look at it a little differently.
yeah. Well, I suppose I mean around this time too. Where was this before or after the drugs? I mean, when did the drugs come into play? Like,
The
did
drugs
you?
came a little bit later than that. The drugs came in probably my lifestyle probably in the 80s.
And you were selling them or doing them at the time?
Well, I was doing a little bit because it was sociable. You went to a bar, you did a little cocaine. It was kind of like everybody was doing it, even some of the mobsters on Mulberry Street. That's kind of like where when I started hanging out on Mulberry Street a little bit, I seen that kind of lifestyle being accepted. Because when I came from in Brooklyn, you didn't do drugs at all. You didn't bother with drugs at all, and I kind of like lived that way for quite a while through my teens. So I got involved with them, hang out with them, go to a bar, do a little cocaine. And then I seen that there was big money in it. And of course, when you have money, you have a lot more power and have a lot more people around you. That's for sure. That people want to hang out with you and you build your own crew. And I kind of took to that. And it was like selling drugs, doing a little bit, but selling them, trying to make money and reputation for myself. And then eventually I got very addicted to cocaine. And then freebasing came around. Richard Pryor, I think, was back in 77, 78. And that came the big Hollywood thing. And I tried freebasing. And that kind of got me. And then I was losing everything, my reputation and everything else, money and the boys of making money. And crack cocaine was the cheapest way to get high. And I got very addicted to crack cocaine.
Well, I mean, at the time too. I mean, you were able to still kind of maintain. I mean, because this went on for years. The drug stretch. I mean, from how long did that go on for? I mean, until you went to prison, right? I mean, but like, what what what, what would you say when it started?
I would say the first 5 to 7 years were probably social.
hmm
And then after that, it started getting a little bit bad with the cocaine. And then I tried freebasing and it didn't make me addicted too much. I wasn't staying out days getting high. I would do a little freebasing and go home and go to sleep. And I thought, okay, this is better than snorting the cocaine. I didn't know that eventually it's going to graduate to where it took me. And then crack came around and really destroyed me. So I'd say probably maybe the last good 8 years of my life before I went to prison in '97, that was how I was living.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, before we start going into that, I mean, there is a few other things as well that I thought were interesting topics to bring up as well. Was that you after a while as well, you met Tommy DeSimone's ex, right? I mean, how did that go down?
Well, we're hanging out in bars, and this was when the social thing with the coke was a little bit more social. You didn't do
Yeah.
it every night, maybe every now and then you do a little bit. You partied, and we were hanging out in a bar, and she was working at a Knish stand or Knish store or something like that. Yeah, and I would go there for Knishes and bring them back for us to eat, hanging out in the bar for lunch and stuff like that at this bar in on the borderline of Queens and Brooklyn. And then after a while, I knew Cookie way back, but didn't have anything. But after a while, I started getting attracted to him. Then we went out, and then after that, there we started dating for a while, for quite a while,
Yeah, I think you said 8 years. That's quite a while. Yeah.
close to about 8 years. Yeah,
Damn. So I mean, she was his girl for quite a while back then before, or to Tommy's.
she was married to Tommy DeSimone.
Oh, up until he was
Until
disappeared.
yeah.
Yeah. Damn. Yeah, I think Sal. I don't know. When I talked with him, I think he may have knew her for sure, Tommy, but I can't remember if he did with Cookie. But yeah, I mean that was a pretty big part of your, like, when the whole drugs, like you said, it was sociable at first, but with her, I mean, you really started to act out, I suppose, like in different ways where things were out of your normal behavior, you'd say, like getting mad, angry, and all that.
Yeah, I don't blame anybody for my addiction. I don't blame circumstance. I don't blame anything. These are choices that I made, and I enjoyed getting high. But I think a lot of it was running from shame and guilt and all the stuff and lifestyle that I was living, and a lot of damage that I was doing to my own personal family. But with Cookie, I would say that we loved each other, but in a way, we brought out the worst in each other. If that makes any sense.
From the book, yeah, it does make sense.
And that's just how it was. So it wasn't her fault, my fault, her lifestyle, my lifestyle. It's just that there was something there, and I was very possessive of anything and anybody. So a lot of jealousy and all that kind of stuff. So my behavior started getting, I guess, radical in some sense. So.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it just, especially with drugs, I mean, it really brings out the worst in a person, and I suppose it makes you more on edge and paranoid, and just anything and everything is against you. I mean, is that kind of how you were feeling at that time?
Well, without a doubt, yeah, yeah. It came to the point where I was so paranoid. Yeah, and I knew I was disrespecting like Nicky and all those guys that they brought me around, and because now from being Robert, the up and coming star, everybody knew me as Robert the crackhead or the Robert the cokehead or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the paranoid real set in, and I think crack cocaine really, really set off a lot of the paranoid that I would get delusions and stuff like that. So it messed me up pretty good.
Yeah, I would imagine so. And I mean, to me, I think from the book as well. I mean, you weren't the only like mob associate or mob guy doing this. I mean, I believe you were getting, in the book, you talked about getting high with a few of the guys that were in that family, the Gambinos. I can't remember which ones they were, but I mean, you weren't the only one that were doing. I mean, was there quite a few other guys that were on that?
Yeah, there was quite a few of us doing it. But I look at my life today and I see OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. No matter what I did it to the extreme. So when I got involved with the mob life, that was my life. I did it to the extreme. I lived it out to the extreme. And then when it came to drugs or gambling or anything that I got involved in, I just did it to the extreme. That just was my lifestyle. And I believe part of that is today, but only now it's my obsession is with Jesus Christ. So I'm on the good path.
Yeah, I mean, it just changed completely from the mom
Exactly.
life to Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the things happen, obviously, and you change and you get out of that, and then, I mean, that's a good obsession, you know. I mean, that's something that's way better of the one that you had before. So,
Without a
y-
doubt.
so I mean, what was we'll segue into that, you know, the whole redemption side of it, because, like you said, everybody started to realize that okay, you're just becoming a drug addict, a major drug addict, and a lot of people at the time they had really started to, from the book is what I'm talking about, is like they really started to just not have faith in you and just stop messing with you. They didn't want to have nothing to do with you. I mean, is that accurate to say?
Oh, it's very accurate to say. And you know, if I was on the opposite side of that, I would have looked at me the same way. You know,
Yeah.
if somebody else was doing that and I was still in the position that I did in the mob, I would look at them that way. And I did look at certain guys that from my neighborhood that became heroin addicts, drug addicts, and stuff like that. I looked at them the same way that these guys were looking at me now. So I became the person that I despise
The most.
my own my old life. That's what I became. So I understood that there, wasn't happy about it, but there was just something about me, and I think I didn't want to deal with reality of what I became.
Yeah.
And what I have to do is I had to stay high constantly. So my addiction was 24/7. If I ran out of drugs, or if I was coming close to running out of drugs, I had to go out and get more to make sure that I would never be out of them. And the only time I was not getting high was when I would pass out. I would have a blackout, fall out in somebody's house, or even in the street sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, even I believe in the book you talked about going to treatment a couple times. It didn't work. I mean, you'd come out, and I mean, it was just an ongoing thing for, like you said, 8 years, right? I mean,
For a long period of time, I tried to clean up my act, but you know what I didn't want to try? I didn't try doing. I didn't try changing my lifestyle.
no.
I wanted to keep living the lifestyle as a mobster, and eventually, what it did was bring me back to bars and places that we would hang out, and bring me back to the lifestyle that I was trying to leave, and get caught up in it all over again.
So it was just an ongoing thing, and it never would stop because you kept being in that same environment, the same guys you were around, the same crimes you were doing, and just more and more stuff that was eating at you.
Yeah, I look at it this way. I look at it that I didn't want to deal with the consequences, but I didn't want to change the lifestyle, and it just doesn't work.
But I mean, eventually you did end up having your moment. But I mean, before you got to that moment, that's where you were changing. I mean, you were arrested, and what happened with that? When you were arrested, you went to prison.
Well, let me just go back a little bit to 1993 when my daughter was born, and I was in a rehab when she was when her mother was about to give birth, and they let me out of the rehab to be there for my daughter. And I really thought in my mind that I would have somebody else to care about, somebody else. I was very narcissistic. My whole life was all about me. I'm a very self-centered guy. But now I thought my daughter coming into my life would change some of that there. And then 7 weeks when she was home, I had an argument with her mother. It was clean up, and we ran out and got high again. And before you know it, never went back home, nor did her mother want me to. So now when I get arrested in 97 and for the case that I had in Queens that I was running away from, and then the feds wanted me for a case in Miami, Florida, for a RICO case. And when I got locked up, just to let you know, that 1996, I was living on the streets of Brooklyn and Queens. I didn't have an apartment for myself. So I was living in the streets, and that's just became my lifestyle. So I understood why my daughter's mother won't want me around my daughter living that kind of a lifestyle. And I thank God that she didn't. But now I got locked up, and my daughter's mother is allowing me to talk to my daughter over the phone. And this one time, when I get locked up, the first thing I'm trying to do is get a good attorney to get me out of the mess I'm getting I got myself into, and they get commissary. I know I'm not going to get bailed out anymore because they wasn't going to give me any bail because I was running away from too many cases in my past.
Yeah.
and get commissary money to live as comfortable as I can, and calling up everybody, trying to get help, and everybody just thought I was better off in prison than out in the street, and it affected me. And then my daughter was, I called on this one time, she was crying, and I said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "Because you won't come and see me." And it just, if I could have ran and got high at that point, in that minute of time, I probably would have. But I didn't. I couldn't, and broke my heart. And I ran back to my cell, just asking God to help, because I didn't want to live with the pain anymore, and the shame and the guilt and all that. And that's kind of where uh, my life started changing.
Damn. Yeah, and I mean, after that point, you were able to. You just started. I mean, you didn't get after that. I mean, there was other outside things that had happened. I mean, a lot of people didn't want to. They were turning their back on you. They didn't want to help you out, and even with I believe the mob guys, they didn't want to put up any money to help you fight your case. Wasn't that the situation on that as well?
Yeah, it was. Where everybody else, where everybody felt that I was useless to everybody, including my own family at that point in time. I believe my family thought I was safer in jail than out in the street, because I was self-destructive. And I understand it now. I don't agree with it all, but I do understand it. And that point, what it came to, is where I just felt I was completely hopeless. Like, this is my life. This is prison's going to be my life. Crack is going to be my life. There was no hope, nothing for me. I had no future to look forward to, and completely felt hopeless above all else, and desperate. And that's when I cried out to Jesus, "Help me, please help me. I can't live like this anymore." That would have been probably the way that I would have thought I was going to get out of the pain that I was suffering. But then I asked Jesus come into my life, and I surrendered my life to Him, and here I am.
Yeah, I mean, so after all that, I mean, you went through, you had to make the move to cooperate as well. And when you did that, I mean, how did that go? Before you even got to where you're at?
It was probably the hardest thing I had to do. I cried for days, probably weeks over it. But you see, I felt I was hopeless. I'm never going to get the status that I would want in the mob, because the drugs already ruined it. They could not trust me to the point of where I wanted to go in that lifestyle. And I understand that, because I wouldn't have trusted somebody like me neither, with certain things that if I was involved with. Uh, and crack seemed to have a strong hold on me. So I didn't see any future for me whatsoever in any of the life that I knew, drugs or crime. And when the government came and said, "If you cooperate with us, we can give you a new start in life," it sounded like the best deal I could have made. So, in a sense, I think, if you want to use a mob term, they gave me an offer I couldn't refuse.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I've just felt. And but it was probably one of the hardest things I had to do. And I know it hurt my family pretty much too, because they were around that lifestyle a little bit. So
And they didn't really agree with you cooperating at all. They didn't want you to.
nobody agreed with my cooperation. Nobody. Uh,
So, I mean, when you did end up going, did you have to? They instantly, they put you in the program, right? I mean, they started giving information, and then they
they
sent you
don't go
somewhere
into
else.
the program until I was still incarcerated. So the program starts actually when you're out of incarceration.
Mm.
But they what they do is they put you in what they call a WITSEC program, or witness protection program, in the jail system. And so that's what I did. But I've rephrased the question. I'll get back to it.
Well, I mean, so after you had gotten out of, you were incarcerated for like a year, or was it less than a year?
2 years.
2 years, and then you got out. They put you in the witness protection. They
Yes.
put you somewhere, and then at that point, they did ask you to testify in a couple cases, didn't they?
I was constantly being brought back and forth to testify. And one case I had, one case in Florida, not with Nicky and them, with this other guy and some guys that were around that I came friends with. His name was Tony Pep.
Hmm.
So anyway, that case in Florida, I did testify. But every time they brought me in for other cases, as my loyalty as a Christian, I felt that I had to be truthful, and I made a cooperation agreement, and I wanted to keep the cooperation agreement. Um, and I would go to them and I would say, if you can do this case without me, I appreciate it if you did it without me. And 9 out of the 10 times that they did bring me, I didn't have to testify.
Wow. So I mean, they did. I mean, you were able to ask them that, and they did accommodate that in some kind of way. Sometimes, and so
I was being up and front about my whole life, being as very transparent as possibly can. If they needed me to testify, I would have testified. So I'm not going to tell you that I wouldn't have, because I made a commitment to do it. And there was agreement that I had, so I was going to keep the agreement. But I would ask them if they can possibly do it without my cooperation. I'd appreciate it if they did it, and they just honored that.
and in the midst of all this, this is when you started to get closer with like God and doing all the studying and all and becoming I believe a speaker and maybe a pastor as well, right?
I call it a minister, but yeah,
Minister.
I'm an associate pastor. But I have a license for ministry. I have a license to marry people. So same thing as a pastor. But my last year in prison is my most precious time with the Lord, because I was doing a program with a college of it was called Set Free Prison Ministries, and doing studies with them, and I obtained 30, I think 30 credits, college credits of biblical studies. Unfortunately, it didn't follow me because I had to get a new name, a new social security number, so they couldn't have that follow up with me when I got released. But
Oh,
yeah, my witnessing started when I was in prison.
yeah. And after that, I mean, you started to. I mean, how many years has it been since then? I mean, how long have you been on this path?
Well, it's 26 years.
Damn,
Yeah. But I did nursing home ministry for 13 years.
13.
I would
How
go
many?
into nursing homes twice a week. And
Yeah.
then my mom had passed away when I was in the witness protection program. I didn't know my mom passed away until 3 days afterwards. And because I was in the program, I couldn't even go to her funeral. And, it broke my heart. And I didn't understand why God was allowing this to happen in my life. So I come up with the thought process that God never wastes a hurt. If I'm hurting, He wants to use it for something. So I just felt that God was asking me to share the love that I wanted to share with my mom. I could share it into nursing homes with other people's moms. And I did nursing home ministry for 13 years, twice a week.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, 13 years. Then after that, you went on to do what?
Then
What did you do? After?
Yeah, people thought that I start sharing my testimony. I got thrown out of the witness protection program. My wife said, "Well, now you could share how God has saved your life, redeemed your life, and you need to speak about it." And that's how that ended up developing too, is that I started going out. So not only in nursing homes, and then I started sharing my testimony in churches and places like that. And my theme of what I do is to let people know that it's never too late for a new beginning. My new beginning started on my hands and knees, crying out to Jesus to help me, and uh, and transforming my life. So I try to give a message that with God, nothing is impossible, and God can transform someone's life. But it's not just the behavior; it's the heart. He gives promises that He give us a new heart. So the way I think, the way I believe, the way I feel, a lot of things are just kind of new from the old life that I lived, and I let people know that they can have what I have too. They can
Yeah.
have that new beginning. They don't have to stay stuck in the situation that they're in. There's always hope with Jesus.
No, you're absolutely right on that. And I think a lot of people can learn from your story because I mean, look at all the stuff that you had went through, you put people through. I mean, all the stuff that you would went through in your past life, and to be able to change it around 26 plus years now, more than that probably, and really being able to be on the right path is very important and powerful to, from the outside people, they think, wow, there's no hope for this guy at all. But I mean, that's not true. It's really not. But you had to earn that. You had to build that up and continue to do that every single day what you used to live, the life that you were involved with. But I mean, obviously, you've been really redeeming your life every single day after all that had happened, man. So that's why I think it's powerful for people to hear you on the podcast, the books, your documentary now, in churches, because you're spreading the word of God and your story as well, that you can change your life around. It's never too late.
Amen. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? I let people know that God has a plan and purpose for each and every one of our lives. All we have to do is just it's believing and then receiving the gift of God's grace, that you could see the mercy of God on my life, that there's no way I should be alive today. There's so many times when people were waiting by my house to kill me, and I just didn't go home that night. And there's so many times that I had overdosed on crack or coke and stuff like that, and I lived through it. So you can see God's mercy. I should be in prison for the rest of my life. And you can see God's mercy in my life at that point. Now you can see God's grace in my life, that He's given me what I don't deserve, a beautiful wife, a place to live, um, so many blessings that God has bestowed upon my life. Is it all great and perfect? No, it's not. But you know, somebody could change their behavior, but only God can change the heart of the person. And when your heart changes, your life changes. And that's the reality of it all. So when I surrendered my heart to Christ, I allowed Him to come in and live in me and then live through me. And he already did it on the cross for everybody. It's just a matter about believing it and then receiving it.
Yeah, I mean that's a perfect way to explain it. There's no other way to look at it like that. So, I mean, with that, I think that's a really good way to end it. I mean, do you have any other final words or anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Just to all those who may be watching your podcast, man, that believe me when I tell you, man, it's never too late for a new beginning, man. My beginning started on my knees in a prison cell, just crying out to God, please help me, please help me. I don't want to live like this anymore. And God reached down and touched and changed my life and changed my heart and changed my mind. And He wants to do that. He did it for you. He did it for you. The Bible says God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, that whoever believe in Him shall not perish but have everlasting life. God did it for you. All you have to do is believe it and receive it. And the grace of God will fall upon your life. And He'll change your life the way He's changed my life.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, Robert. That's powerful, man.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be on your show. I appreciate it.
Robert's got one heck of a story. He is very lucky to be here to tell his story. Robert's book, The Witness, is a great story about a mobster changing his life around and finding God. I highly recommend his book to anyone that loves a good redemption story. And if you enjoyed this interview and him talking about his life, he goes into way more depth in that book. That book can be found in the video description. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this interview. Also, please share this video with anyone that you may know that may be an at-risk criminal. You never know, it might change their mind. Please subscribe to my channel for more interviews like this. At the end of this video, a playlist will pop up of all my other Mafia-related interviews. Thank you again for watching, and of course, we'll see you on the next one.